All right, let's do this. What's up, guys? Josh Lau here at TheCardGuyz, and today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new High Seas expansion slot card for the Warrior class, Escalate Bloodshed. Now, this card has seen quite a bit of criticism from the Warrior community, and well, this card is pretty complicated. I do want to break it down logically. We're going to take a look at the different scenarios that you can get into with this card and the value proposition of this card. We're going to talk a lot about how to extract value from this card. Now, once we get into a lot of the calculations, the TLDR is that at its face value, this card is worth -3 value. Now, you might be like, Josh, why are we playing cards that have -3 value? Well, there are several ways for us to increase that back to neutral or even into the positive area. Now, this is not going to be the easiest thing to do. This is not a value town card that's just plug and play. It's broken. It just fits into every deck. It's not. That's not what Warriors get. Let's just keep it real. Um, this is a card that is going to be very, very niche in Fang and Kasai. I don't think Bolton, Olympia, or Dorinthia are really going to run this card. And, well, we'll get into that. So let's read the card, and then we'll get into some of the scenarios that you can get into with this card. So Escalate Bloodshed is a 0-cost, red pitch, warrior instant aura with no block value that says whenever a hero draws a card during an action phase, they lose 1 life. So this is unpreventable life loss. At the beginning of each hero's action phase, they draw a card. At the beginning of each hero's end phase, if a weapon did not attack this turn, destroy this. So let's jump into some of the scenarios that you can get into with this card. So let's start off with the first scenario. So the first scenario, let's assume that everything is going smoothly and you and your opponent are both weapon-based decks, and your opponent attacks with a weapon, and you play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your opponent's turn. The reason why your opponent has to attack with a weapon is because if you play Escalate Bloodshed and they did not attack with a weapon, the aura would blow up at the end of their turn and you would look like a dumbass. Okay? So your opponent needs to attack with a weapon. Okay? Your opponent attacks with a weapon, you play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your opponent's turn, and you choose to escalate. In other words, you attack with weapons, and your opponent, also being a weapon-based deck or a deck that wants to escalate, will attack with weapons back. All right, so what happens in this scenario? So at the end of the turn cycle, so we consider a turn cycle being the very end of your opponent's turn, right when you play Escalate Bloodshed, all the way to the end of your opponent's turn. So that would be one turn cycle, right? So what happens during that one turn cycle? So you went card neutral because you played Escalate Bloodshed, but then you drew a card at the beginning of your turn. You lost 1 life, so that's -1. Then on your opponent's turn, your opponent gained 1 card. So we're going to consider that -3 because most cards in Flesh and Blood are worth 3 value. So they gained a card and then they lost a life. So that's 1 value for you. So if we add all of these things up, I knew that grade school counting was going to come in handy eventually one day. We get 0 plus -1 plus -3 plus 1. And in total, that's -3 value, right? If this continues for several turns, basically we're just going to be -3 value behind. So no matter whether it's 1 turn or 3 turns or 5 turns of this aura being on the board, we are going to be behind by 3 value. And this is just going to continue until somebody dies, right? All right, so let's take a look at scenario number 2. So scenario number 2, again, your opponent has to attack with a weapon. You play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your opponent's turn, and your opponent escalates. However, you choose not to escalate after, let's say, the first turn cycle, or maybe the third turn cycle, as we have in this example here. So what happens then? So because we've gone 1.5 turn cycle, so you're cutting off your opponent from one card draw. So you're also going to get one extra card draw compared to them. So in this case, you're getting +3 because you drew 2 cards. You lost 2 life because you drew 2 cards. Your opponent gained 1 card, so that's -3 value. Your opponent lost 1 life from drawing that 1 card, so that's 1 value for you. So we add all that up. However, there's one additional factor here. So you did not attack with a weapon. So in order to cut the turn cycle in half, so ending it prematurely, you basically have to not attack with a weapon. Now, in the case of Kasai, that is really, frankly, dumb because your weapons are free. So why would you not attack with your weapon? And in the case of Fang, generally your weapon is going to be free as well, or your if you don't attack with your obsidian fire veins, like you can't even play your attack reactions onto them, and then you're going to lose all your fealty, right? So in both scenarios, or in both situations, like the amount of negative value you get for not attacking with your weapon is quite substantial. Either way. So at minimum, you're losing 1 value, potentially much higher. Uh, so yeah. So whether it's 1.5 cycles or 3.5 cycles, as I wrote here, you're losing at least 1 value, potentially a lot more, right? So let's take a look at scenario number 3. Scenario number 3, your opponent attacks with a weapon just like normal. You play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your opponent's turn, and you wish to escalate, but your opponent does not want to escalate. So what happens here? So you draw a card, but you spent a card, so you're neutral. You lost 1 life because you drew 1 card. Your opponent gained a card, so that's -3. Your opponent lost 1 life because they drew a card, and your opponent didn't attack with a weapon. Okay, so that could be some value, that could be very little value. It really depends on your opponent. However, if they choose not to escalate, they probably plan their whole turn around not escalating. Now, this might be like the second cycle or the third cycle, since it's a little bit harder to, because you're playing this at the end of their turn, it's a little bit hard for them to react suddenly uh, to this aura. But that's not the hardest thing to do. But yeah, so in this scenario, you're also down by 3 value, at least. Maybe you get some indescribable value from your opponent not attacking with a weapon. Okay. Okay, so all these 3 scenarios seem really bad, Josh. Well, it can get worse. So let me introduce you to scenario number 4 and 5. So in scenario 4, your opponent doesn't attack with a weapon. Now, this might be because they literally don't have a weapon, like Kano or Verdance or Prism, or there's quite a few heroes in the game that do not have a traditional weapon, or they rarely use their weapon. And you decide to attack with a weapon, and because you don't want, you want to play your cards, right? You don't want to, you don't want them to just sit there. You decide to play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your turn. Well, this is actually the worst thing that you can do because it is basically the same as scenario 1, 2, 3, but you're going to lose an additional 2 value because you're giving your opponent the first card draw. Now, they're going to pay a life for it, so it's not -3, but it's still -2. On top of the -3 that you're normally going to get, so that's -5 value if you play it out like in scenario 4. So you basically should never play it out in scenario 4. There's another alternative, scenario 5. Your opponent doesn't attack with a weapon, and you play Escalate Bloodshed at the end of your opponent's turn. And, well, because we read the card, and the card says if you haven't attacked with a weapon, it blows up. So it blows up, and you lost 3 value because you spent the card for nothing. So, and you're going to question why you're playing this card at all, and you're going to have a quarter life or midlife crisis or something. I don't know, but it's pretty bad. Okay, so Josh, I hear you saying, Josh, this all sounds really bad. And yes, it does sound pretty bad. You're at least down 3 value, and let's be real, scenario 4, scenario 5 are not supposed to happen. That you're not supposed to play this against decks that don't attack you with weapons often, okay? If your opponent does not have a weapon, you should not be bringing this card in, okay? If your opponent rarely attacks you with a weapon, you should not bring this card in, okay? So we're down at least 3 value. How do we recover some of that value? Let's talk about that now. So there's several ways to recover value with this card. Now, I wrote at the top here, TLDR, we need to make up 3 value to make the card value neutral, okay? So that could be things that your opponent does, or things that you do, or things that your opponent doesn't do. So let's kind of break that all down. So the first way that you could get back some of the value from playing this card is whenever your opponent draws a card, they'll get pinged for 1. Now, when we think about card draw, a lot of the time we think about, Blood Rush Bellow draws cards, Open the Floodgate draws cards. However, there are many other, incidental card draws in this game. For example, Sink Below. If they use the Sink Below ability, because of the way Escalate Bloodshed is worded, they'll get pinged. Same with Crown of Providence. If they use the filter ability on that, they'll get pinged. Cards like That All You Got, which are very strong against Fang and Kasai, that'll also get pinged. Now, obviously, this is very, very good against Brutes and, I was going to say Wizards, but it's really Kano. So Brutes have things like Blood Rush Bellow, they have Bare Fangs, Pulping, Wild Ride, things like that draw discard. So they'll get pinged there. Kano has Open the Floodgates, Kindle, Ragamuffin's Hat, and several other cards. If a hero is drawing cards with copper, silver, or gold, let's be real, it's probably going to be the gold. Then they'll get pinged. So that's basically the pirates. Another example of card draw that might be very common in the upcoming metagame is 3 of a Kind. So that's 3 instances of drawing a card. So they'll get pinged 3 times. Cards like Savor Bloodshed, which are basically auto draws for the assassin decks and decent for the warrior decks that are playing daggers. This is going to ping them as well. In particular, Victor has a lot of ways to trigger this. So Trounce, Test of Strength, visit the Goldmane Estate, the new Fable that, like, if Victor pitches that and creates a gold, draws a card, he'll get pinged. We also have Dio with Cerebellum Processor. Whenever she draws a card off that, she'll get pinged. So there are many, 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 many ways that opponents could draw cards, and this can make up some of the value. Another way that you could make up some of the value from playing Escalate Bloodshed is if your opponent cannot convert the random card that they get easily. So this is a card that they get at the beginning of their turn. So they remember, you have to make your decisions with your hand on defense first. So they're going to get this card and they may be able to use it. They may not be able to use it. Their arsenal may already be occupied. You never know, right? So what does that mean? Let's say they draw a Sink Below. Let's say they're a very defensive deck. They have a lot of D-reacts. If they draw a Sink Below, they can't convert that on offense, almost certainly. Also, there are many decks that cannot scale very well with an increased hand, either because they lack the action points, or they just lack the go again, or maybe they're a deck that only scales with things like Pummel. So these are other. This is a card. Escalate Bloodshed is a card that could be used against those more defensive decks to help extract some value and create a larger offensive threat against them. Because you're going to have 5 cards potentially to push into their 4 cards. So during that cycle, you'll be able to push in some more damage. So the thing is, like, Warrior doesn't really struggle that much against fatigue decks, especially Fang and Kasai being dual wield warriors. They're some of the most resilient decks in the format against fatigue, but adding this just creates that situation where you get to press 5 cards against their 4 cards turn after turn, if assuming that you could keep this thing alive. So yeah. All right, so we talked about things that your opponent can do. Let's talk more specifically about what the warrior heroes in particular can do to help make up some of the value from playing Escalate Bloodshed. Okay, so I've been talking about Kasai and Fang mostly because I believe that this card is more tailor-made for these two heroes. There's a world where I could see Dorinthia possibly playing this, but as for Bolton and Olympia, I don't really see them playing it. So let's first talk about Kasai. So Kasai, whenever you have Escalate Bloodshed on the field at the beginning of your turn, that basically means your hero ability is online because you've drawn a card. So that means you don't have to pop your gold for drawing cards, and you don't have to pop gold to uh, turn your hero ability online. So you can use that gold for other purposes, like playing a larger Raisin army or an earlier Raisin army. Or let's say you start off with Crown of Dominion, you start off with a gold token, and you have to use that gold token very, very early in the game. Sometimes it can be hard to reestablish another gold token, and this basically helps you smooth out that period where you don't have a gold token, but you still want to have a smooth offense. This can help in that very particular instance. Kasai being a deck that is red yellow focus. I mean, she does play a decent amount of blues. She plays like 15 to 18 blues. But basically, if she draws a red or yellow, she can probably convert them decently. If it's a yellow that's like not that doesn't convert very smoothly, she could just arsenal it. If it's a blue, she could convert it by making vigor tokens with Grains of Blood Spill, or giving +1 to her weapons through Brave Forge Bracers. So Kasai basically can convert that extra card into 3 value pretty consistently. Let's talk a little bit about Fang. So Fang is less likely to brick if he gets to see 5 cards per turn. So if you already have your hero ability online, this means you are more likely to see a Draconic or Draconic Warrior attack reaction. This will help you, swing twice, reset your dynamos, basically do your whole, Fang Gang game plan. Also, if you see this card before you're turned on, this can help accelerate you to being turned on, because then you'll have like 2 attack reacts to handle their D react, or just have an extra card to pitch into things just to get that third fealty as quickly as possible. Also of note, this card does not, it interacts in a good way for Fang with loyalty beyond the grave, because that says at the start of your turn. So that's not during your action phase. So you can draw from loyalty beyond the grave, go up to a 6-card hand if you want, or 7 cards if you have an arsenal. So yeah, that really should help Fang close out some games. Similarly to Kasai, Fang has no problem converting an extra card in 95% of situations, because his deck is mostly red, and he also has access to Grains of Blood Spell and Brave Forge Bracers, just like Kasai. All right, let's talk a little bit more about. We can kind of like wrap things up at this point. So there are some. Oh, sorry. Let me quickly talk about a couple other benefits that could be useful. Uh, so this playing Escalate Bloodshed allows you to cycle through your deck faster. Now, your opponent also cycles through their deck faster, so that's not necessarily the greatest thing, but it does allow you to see important cards faster, especially for Kasai and Fang. They're fairly reliant on seeing, important cards in certain matchups. It really matchup dependent, but neither deck is going to be very sad that they're cycling through their deck faster. You'll also be able to get to your pitch stack faster. So if you set up, let's say you pitch a Raise an Army, and then you have to block with your second one. Let's say you're only playing 2. If you need to, you can accelerate faster to your pitch stack to get to that Raise an Army again, so you can cast it. Same with Fang. If you're playing with Sharpened Senses and Fire and Brimstone, I kind of like that combo for closing out games. You can get to that combo faster, or you can, let's say you arsenal one of them, you get to see the other one faster because you're just going through your deck faster, right? This can also provide an arcane shunt at the end of the game. So what I mean by that is your opponent drops to 1, and at the end of your turn, you play this out. It goes to their turn, they draw a card, they die. And you get an Xbox achievement unlocked or something like that, right? This is a tactic that I think is going to be pretty rare, because that means you didn't use the card on defense, you didn't use the card on offense, and at the end of the turn you played it. and you attacked with a weapon. So it's like there's so many things that have to line up for this to work, but it might happen, right? This also forces weapon-based decks to escalate or lose tempo. So this means other warrior decks basically have to engage with you, which, you know, could be, I don't know if that's good or bad, but if they decide that they want to pump the brakes a little bit because maybe they're behind, they'll get even more behind. Yeah. Also, this could possibly be good on turn 0 if you're going second and they attacked you with a weapon. That's going to be quite rare, but in the scenarios where they did attack you with a weapon and you got to go second, you got to play this out at the end of their turn, you basically negated the -3 value because you're going to draw up at the end of your turn anyways, right? So, all right. So let's summarize all of this into, you know, a nice snippet. So basically, this is not a straightforward value town card. This is a card that is going to take some work to make work. And it's, if you just play this out and you aren't extracting value from this card, either through your opponent drawing cards, your opponent being inefficient in their defense, or through your hero ability like Kasai, or your accelerated hero ability like Fang, this card is going to be negative value and you probably shouldn't be playing it. However, there are heroes, in particular Kasai and Fang, that this could see some very, very niche usage in. This card does have a pretty high opportunity cost. The reason being, this is a red no block. So theoretically, you could pitch this, but you probably shouldn't. And, you know, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Iron Song Pride, because you basically have to play this card when you see it. If you see 2 of these at the same time, this could also be a very, very, could be very, very detrimental. In addition, sideboard slots, I wouldn't say are super constrained for Kasai or Fang, but there are several matchups that they do struggle with. So, for example, neither one really loves to play against Wizard. Neither one of those really loves to see Prism. So a lot of their sideboard slots are dedicated to the Wizard matchups, to including some poppers for Prism. So it's not like they have a ton of sideboard slots just sitting around willy-nilly, right? So there is an opportunity cost for including this card. Additionally, this is completely ineffective against some heroes. Like I said, if they don't have a weapon or they don't swing their weapon often, you're not going to get to deploy this in a scenario 1, 2, or 3. You're going to deploy this in a scenario 4 or 5, which is really bad. TLDR, this has some niche possible applications for Kasai or Fang, maybe as a 1 of, maybe as a 2 of, against heavy weapon-based decks or decks that are very fatigue-based and they like to swing their weapon a lot. So is this card going to be the next Blade Flurry? No, it's not. Is this the next Morlock Hill? No, again. This card will see some very, very, very niche play in 1 or 2 decks. This is very, very, very similar to Iron Song Pride. Yeah. Now, I would not have designed a card that looks like this personally, but this is what LSS decided to give us this set. All right, so be it. All right. Well, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the Escalate Bloodshed card. I will be at Nats, so I'll see you guys there. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey man, did you get the KO deck for Worlds? No one's doing that, okay? Like,
to play the whole horse down. Don't scale. You're getting greedy. You're getting 2 cards. Put him in the middle for now. That's perfect. All right, next year. RTN champion. Yeah, we're gonna have to order a couple more.
Thanks for watching the video.
Here's some more Card Guys videos you might enjoy.